"This house was never yours, Margaret," Emily said softly at the reception after Robert's funeral, her voice gentle enough for strangers but sharp enough for its target. "It belonged to him, and now it belongs to Daniel." The words did not echo, yet they seemed to settle into the walls of the Whitmore home, into the crown molding Robert had installed himself 32 years ago, into the hardwood floors Margaret had polished every spring since they moved to West Hartford with nothing but a mortgage and hope. Guests still stood in small clusters in the living room, balancing paper plates of casserole and slices of store-bought pound cake, murmuring condolences that blurred together into one low hum. Margaret stood near the fireplace, hands folded neatly in front of her black dress, accepting sympathy with a nod that was steady, dignified, almost serene. She did not look at Emily right away. She did not look at Daniel either. Her only son stood beside his wife, eyes lowered, jaw tight, as though the pattern in the Persian rug required his full attention. Margaret noticed the distance first in the way he avoided her gaze, not in the words Emily had chosen. Robert's portrait rested on the mantel above them, taken the summer before his heart gave out on a quiet Sunday afternoon. In the photo, he was laughing at something Margaret had said, his hand resting lightly at her back. She could still feel the weight of that hand, warm and protective. The house had felt different since that day, larger, quieter, too still. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder without his voice to compete with it. Emily stepped closer, lowering her tone as if sharing practical advice. "It's a big place to manage alone," she added, glancing around at the high ceilings and wide bay windows. "Utilities, property taxes, maintenance. It makes sense for Daniel and me to take over. You'll be more comfortable somewhere smaller." Margaret's expression did not change. She had heard that tone before over the past few years, polite, measured, persuasive. It was the tone Emily used when suggesting holiday schedules be adjusted, when Sunday dinners were quietly phased out, when family traditions were labeled impractical. Margaret inclined her head slightly, as though considering a reasonable proposal. "I see," she said, her voice calm, almost thoughtful. No one nearby would have guessed that. A quiet line had just been drawn across her life. She looked around the room one more time. The lace curtains she had sewn herself. The oak staircase Robert had refinished. The dining table that had held Thanksgiving turkeys and birthday cakes and report cards. This was not just square footage and market value. This was 32 years of shared mornings, of coffee brewed at 6:15 a.m., of snow shoveled from the driveway before Daniel caught the school bus. Emily mistook Margaret's composure for surrender. Daniel mistook it for exhaustion. Neither noticed the brief flicker in her eyes, not anger, not grief, but calculation. When the last guest finally left and the front door closed with a soft click, Margaret walked through the house slowly, her heels quiet against the hardwood. She paused at Robert's study, where his reading glasses still rested beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. "You'll never have to ask anyone for permission," he had once told her years ago, during a conversation that Daniel had not been part of. Margaret reached into the drawer of the antique writing desk and touched the small brass key she kept there. She did not cry. She did not argue. She simply let them believe what they wanted to believe. And that was their first mistake. The house felt larger once the condolences ended and the driveway emptied, as though the silence itself had expanded to fill every hallway. Margaret stood alone in the foyer long after Daniel and Emily retreated to the guest bedroom, their muted voices drifting through the vents in careful, practical tones. She removed her black heels and placed them neatly beside the staircase, then walked into the kitchen where a half-tray of untouched sandwiches sat under plastic wrap. The refrigerator hummed steadily, indifferent to grief, indifferent to ownership. She began clearing plates with deliberate movements, rinsing porcelain under warm water, stacking them to dry just as she had done for decades after family gatherings. No one offered to help. No one asked if she needed rest. From the dining room she could hear Emily speaking in a lowered voice about real estate values in the neighborhood, about comparable homes that had sold within 30 days, about square footage and potential renovations. Daniel responded in short phrases, the way he did when he had already made up his mind but did not wish to say so out loud. Margaret dried her hands and leaned lightly against the counter, listening without appearing to listen. The conversation was not about her comfort. It was about opportunity. She walked down the hallway toward the primary bedroom she had shared with Robert for more than 3 decades. His side of the bed remained perfectly made, the indentation on the pillow barely visible but still there if one looked closely. His navy cardigan hung on the hook behind the door. She ran her fingers along the sleeve, feeling the familiar wool beneath her skin. In the quiet she remembered the afternoon 3 years earlier when Robert insisted on meeting with their attorney, a cautious man named Harold Bennett who spoke carefully and never rushed a sentence. Daniel had been traveling for work that week. Emily had not yet been told about the appointment. Margaret recalled sitting beside Robert at the long oak conference table, signing documents she had read twice before placing her name on the final page. She had not asked many questions then because she trusted her husband completely, but she had understood enough. Back in the present, footsteps approached down the hall. Emily appeared at the doorway, arms crossed lightly, her expression arranged into polite concern. She mentioned that it might be wise for Margaret to consider moving into something more manageable, perhaps a condominium with lower maintenance, somewhere closer to services and community activities. Margaret nodded as though absorbing sensible advice. She spoke quietly, thanking Emily for thinking ahead. Daniel remained a few steps behind his wife, hands in his pockets, avoiding direct eye contact. Margaret noticed how easily they discussed timelines, how confidently they spoke of repainting walls and updating fixtures. She did not challenge them. She did not defend herself. Instead she crossed the room to the antique dresser, opened the top drawer, and removed a small envelope she had placed there years ago. She slipped it into the pocket of her coat without comment. When Emily suggested meeting with a realtor within the week, Margaret simply said that tomorrow she had an errand to run at the bank. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. Outside, the late afternoon light settled across the front lawn Robert had mowed every Saturday morning. Inside, Margaret allowed them to continue planning a future they did not yet understand. Margaret left the house at 9 the next morning just as she had every weekday for years when Robert was alive, except this time she carried no grocery list and no dry cleaning ticket in her purse. The sky over West Hartford was pale and clear, the kind of quiet autumn morning that made the maple trees along her street look almost painted. Daniel and Emily were still asleep when she closed the front door behind her. She noticed that Daniel's car had been moved to the center of the driveway, no longer tucked respectfully to the side. A small detail but telling. At the bank, Margaret greeted the teller by name. She had opened her first savings account there in 1987, the year they bought the house. The young woman behind the counter offered condolences, speaking softly about how much she had admired Robert. Margaret thanked her and asked to access her safe deposit box. Inside the private room, she sat alone at the narrow table and unlocked the small metal container with the brass key she had kept for years. She removed a thick envelope stamped with the law firm's name and placed it carefully in front of her. Her hands did not tremble as she unfolded the documents. The deed transfer dated 3 years earlier. The trust agreement bearing both her signature and Robert's. The clause that placed the property entirely under the Margaret Whitmore Living Trust, effective immediately upon execution. Robert had insisted on that wording. He had said that security was not something to postpone. Margaret read the pages slowly, not because she doubted them, but because she wanted to feel their weight again. She remembered Harold Bennett explaining that the house would not pass through probate, that it would not automatically shift to any heir without her direct authorization. At the time, Daniel had been building his career, busy and ambitious. Emily had been newly married into the family, attentive but already assessing. Robert had noticed more than he let on. Margaret returned the original documents to the box and kept certified copies in her purse. When she walked back into the bank lobby, she paused by the large window overlooking Main Street. People moved through their ordinary routines, unaware that ownership, like loyalty, could be misunderstood so easily. Back at the house later that morning, she found Emily at the kitchen table with the laptop open, a real estate website glowing on the screen. Daniel stood beside her, pointing at photographs of renovated kitchens and staged living rooms. They stopped talking when Margaret entered. Emily smiled quickly and asked how her errand went. Margaret placed her handbag on the counter and removed her gloves with unhurried precision. She said the bank had been efficient as always. Daniel cleared his throat and mentioned that a realtor friend could stop by later in the week, just to give an estimate. Margaret looked at him for a long moment, not unkindly but steadily. Then she nodded once, as if approving a harmless suggestion. She walked past them toward the hallway, the envelope resting securely in her purse. Emily returned to scrolling through listings, confident in numbers and timelines. Daniel relaxed slightly, reassured by his mother's calm. Neither of them understood that the future they were planning depended on a document they had never seen and a decision Margaret had already made years ago. She allowed the quiet to settle again. The same quiet that had followed her through decades of marriage, the quiet that often hid the strongest resolve. By late afternoon the house had settled into a rhythm that no longer included Robert's footsteps, yet Margaret moved through it as though he might walk in at any moment, setting his briefcase down by the entryway and asking what was for dinner. She prepared tea in the small kettle he had given her on their 25th anniversary, measuring the water carefully, watching the steam rise in thin silver threads. From the dining room she could hear Emily on the phone, her voice bright and professional as she discussed market trends with someone she referred to as Carol from Westbrook Realty. Words like listing window, competitive offer, and buyer interest floated down the hallway. Daniel's deeper voice occasionally joined in, uncertain but agreeable. Margaret carried her teacup into Robert's study and closed the door behind her. The room still smelled faintly of leather and cedar. On the bookshelf above his desk stood framed photographs of Daniel at various ages, missing front teeth, graduation cap, wedding tuxedo. Margaret paused at the photograph from Daniel's wedding day, remembering how Emily had first stepped into this house with careful compliments and attentive smiles. Back then she had called Margaret every Sunday, asking for recipes and family stories, eager to learn the traditions that shaped the Whitmore name. Over time the calls had become texts, the visits shorter, the decisions made elsewhere. Margaret sat in Robert's chair and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside lay a slim leather folder she had not touched in months. She placed the certified copies of the trust documents beside it, and let her mind drift back to the evening Robert first mentioned restructuring their assets. They had been sitting on the back patio, watching Daniel and Emily argue quietly about renovation costs for their own townhouse. Robert had observed more than he said. He had noticed how easily financial conversations became expectations. That night he told Margaret that love and property should never be confused. He wanted her protected, not dependent on goodwill. Margaret had resisted at first, worried that Daniel might interpret the move as distrust. Robert had shaken his head gently and said that preparation was not an accusation, it was wisdom. In the present, footsteps approached again. Daniel knocked softly and stepped inside before she answered. He asked if she felt ready to discuss next steps, suggesting that managing a 5-bedroom colonial at 71 could become overwhelming. His tone carried concern but also assumption. Margaret listened without interruption. She told him she appreciated his care, and that she would consider every option carefully. She did not mention the trust. She did not mention the clause that required her sole authorization for any transfer of ownership. Daniel seemed relieved by her calm, mistaking composure for agreement. When he left the study, Margaret remained seated for several minutes, her gaze resting on Robert's signature at the bottom of the document. Outside the window, the lawn stretched toward the white picket fence Robert had repaired each spring. Inside, the houseplants continued to form without her consent. Margaret closed the leather folder, placed it back into the drawer, and locked it with quiet precision. She had no intention of raising her voice. She had no intention of defending what was already hers. Instead, she allowed the illusion to grow, knowing that the stronger it became, the more decisive its collapse would be. The following morning, Margaret rose before sunrise, the way she had done for decades, and prepared coffee in the same ceramic pot Robert had insisted made it taste better. The house was quiet except for the low murmur of the heating system turning on against the early October chill. She carried her cup to the front window and watched as a silver sedan pulled slowly to the curb. Emily had not wasted time. By 8:30, a woman in a tailored gray coat stood at the front door, introducing herself as Carol Simmons from Westbrook Realty, with a firm handshake and a sympathetic smile that felt professionally rehearsed. Margaret welcomed her inside without hesitation. Daniel appeared from the hallway, already dressed, speaking with a tone that balanced grief and anticipation. Emily followed, tablet in hand, ready to highlight upgrades and potential selling points. Carol walked through the foyer, tilting her head thoughtfully at the staircase, commenting on the original oak banister and the crown molding in the living room. She asked about square footage, about the age of the roof, about recent renovations. Daniel answered most of the questions, occasionally glancing toward his mother as though expecting confirmation. Margaret offered small clarifications, mentioning the furnace replaced 6 years ago, the new windows installed the previous spring. She did not challenge the assumption that an evaluation meant permission. Instead, she watched as Carol stepped into the dining room and paused by the bay window overlooking the backyard Robert had landscaped himself. The realtor spoke carefully about market demand and suggested that with minor updates the property could attract strong offers within 30 days. Emily's eyes brightened at the phrase strong offers. Daniel nodded slowly, already calculating. Margaret remained seated at the head of the dining table, hands folded calmly, listening to strangers discuss her home in terms of staging and return on investment. When Carol finished her preliminary assessment, she asked gently about ownership documentation, so she could prepare a formal comparative market analysis. Daniel responded quickly, saying that everything would be straightforward since the house had been in his father's name. Margaret lifted her gaze then, not sharply, but with quiet precision. She explained that documentation would need to be reviewed before any next steps were considered. Her tone was polite, almost maternal. Carol sensed a subtle shift and suggested scheduling a follow-up once all paperwork was in order. After the realtor left, Emily closed the front door with visible satisfaction, already discussing paint colors and potential listing dates. Daniel spoke about timing, about acting quickly before winter slowed buyer interest. Margaret stood from her chair and carried her empty coffee cup to the sink. She washed it slowly, setting it to dry as she had done thousands of times before. Then she turned toward them and said that before any decisions were made, there would be a meeting with the attorney who had handled Robert's estate planning. Her voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It simply stated a fact. Daniel hesitated, surprised by the firmness beneath her calm. Emily's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. They agreed, believing it to be a procedural formality. Margaret nodded once and walked back down the hallway toward Robert's study, where the leather folder remained locked in the drawer. Outside, leaves drifted across the lawn in slow circles. Inside, expectations continued to build around an outcome that had never belonged to them. 2 days later, Margaret sat in the passenger seat of Daniel's car as they drove to Harold Bennett's office in downtown Hartford, the city skyline rising ahead in clean lines of glass and stone. Emily had insisted on coming, claiming that it was important for everyone to be informed. Daniel kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, his posture stiff, as though the meeting were a routine errand rather than something that carried consequence. Margaret watched the familiar streets pass by, remembering how many times she and Robert had driven this same route together, usually stopping afterward for lunch at a small cafe near Bushnell Park. Back then the conversations had been quiet but certain. They had believed in preparation, in planning beyond what was visible. Inside the law office, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. Harold Bennett greeted Margaret first, his handshake warm and respectful. He offered condolences again, and led them into the same conference room where Margaret had signed documents years earlier. Emily took a seat closest to the head of the table, placing her leather planner in front of her as if attending a negotiation. Daniel sat beside her, glancing occasionally at his mother. Harold began by reviewing standard estate procedures, explaining probate timelines and asset distribution in measured tones. Daniel nodded along, assuming familiarity. Emily asked a few pointed questions about transfer of title and tax implications. Margaret remained quiet, hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze steady on the attorney. When Harold reached the subject of the family residence, he adjusted his glasses and opened a separate folder. He explained that the property had been transferred into the Margaret Whitmore Living Trust 3 years earlier, removing it from the probate estate entirely. The words settled into the room with a calm finality. Daniel blinked, confusion replacing certainty. Emily leaned forward, asking for clarification. Harold repeated that the trust named Margaret as sole trustee and primary beneficiary during her lifetime, with full authority over occupancy, sale, or retention. No transfer could occur without her explicit written consent. Daniel's expression shifted slowly from surprise to realization. Emily's planner remained unopened in front of her. Margaret did not smile. She did not look triumphant. She simply listened as Harold outlined the legal structure Robert had insisted upon, emphasizing that it had been carefully considered and properly executed. Daniel turned toward his mother, searching her face for explanation. Margaret met his eyes calmly and said that his father had wanted her secure, not dependent on assumptions. Her tone carried no accusation, only fact. Emily asked whether there had been any misunderstanding. Harold responded gently that there was none. The documentation was clear and enforceable. Silence followed, heavier than any raised voice. Margaret rested her hands on the polished surface of the table and thanked Harold for his time. Outside, traffic moved steadily along Main Street, indifferent to private revelations. Inside that conference room, expectations quietly unraveled, not through conflict, but through clarity. Margaret stood, collected her handbag, and walked toward the door with measured steps, leaving behind the illusion that had begun forming the moment she chose not to argue. The drive back to West Hartford felt longer than usual, though traffic moved smoothly along Interstate 84, and the early afternoon sun cast a clear, steady light across the windshield. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, his jaw set in a way Margaret had only seen when he was struggling to reconcile pride with reality. Emily stared out the passenger side window, her reflection faint against the glass, her earlier confidence replaced by a tight silence that no longer felt strategic. Margaret sat in the back seat, her posture upright, her handbag resting neatly on her lap. She did not fill the silence. She allowed it to stretch, to settle, to do its quiet work. When they pulled into the driveway, the white Colonial stood exactly as it had that morning, unchanged by legal clarifications or shifting expectations. Daniel turned off the engine but did not immediately open the door. He finally spoke, his voice measured but strained, asking why she had never told him about the trust. Margaret answered calmly that his father had believed in preparing without announcing every safeguard. She explained that security does not require applause, and that some decisions are meant to prevent conflict, not create it. Emily stepped out of the car first, walking toward the front door with brisk steps, as though speed might restore control. Inside the house, the air felt still, almost observant. Margaret moved to the kitchen and placed her handbag on the counter. Daniel followed her, his expression softer now, confusion overtaking frustration. He asked whether she planned to sell the house at all. Margaret poured herself a glass of water before responding. She said that decisions about the house would be made when she was ready, not when market conditions seemed favorable. Her tone remained even without accusation. Emily entered the room and suggested that transparency might have avoided unnecessary embarrassment. Margaret looked at her steadily and replied that assumptions had created the embarrassment, not silence. The words were spoken gently, yet they carried a firmness that left no room for argument. Daniel ran a hand through his hair and paced once across the tile floor. He admitted that he had believed the house would naturally pass to him, that it had seemed logical. Margaret nodded, acknowledging that logic often follows expectation. She reminded him that love does not automatically transfer property, and that responsibility includes understanding the full picture before making plans. No voices rose. No doors slammed. The conflict existed entirely within realization. Later that evening, Margaret walked through the living room and paused by the fireplace where Robert's portrait still stood. The house felt different again. Not larger this time, but clearer. Emily remained upstairs, her movements sharper, more deliberate. Daniel lingered at the dining table, staring at nothing in particular. Margaret did not feel victorious. She felt steady. She had allowed them to believe what suited them because belief, when unchecked, reveals more than confrontation ever could. The illusion had not shattered loudly. It had dissolved quietly, leaving behind the simple truth that ownership, like dignity, does not require volume to be real. The next morning the house moved more carefully, as if every floorboard understood that something irreversible had shifted. Margaret prepared breakfast as she always had, oatmeal on the stove, fresh fruit arranged neatly in a ceramic bowl, coffee brewed strong and steady. Daniel entered the kitchen first, his shoulders slightly lowered, the confidence of previous days replaced by contemplation. He thanked her for breakfast in a quieter voice than usual and took a seat without speaking further. Emily followed a few minutes later, dressed precisely as always, though her expression lacked its usual composure. She poured coffee but did not add cream, stirring it longer than necessary as if searching for words that would restore balance. Margaret set 3 plates on the table and joined them. No one mentioned the meeting with Harold Bennett. No one referenced the trust directly. The silence was no longer built on assumption. It was built on awareness. After breakfast, Daniel cleared his plate, an action he had not done in years while visiting. Margaret noticed but did not comment. Instead, she walked into the living room and opened the curtains, letting the late morning light spill across the hardwood floors. Outside, a neighbor walked a golden retriever along the sidewalk, unaware that the Whitmore household had quietly rearranged its understanding of power. Emily approached Margaret later in the hallway, her tone carefully moderated. She suggested that perhaps they had moved too quickly, that grief had complicated their judgment. Margaret listened, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly at her sides. She acknowledged that grief often reveals what people prioritize when they feel uncertain. Emily did not respond immediately. The hallway felt narrower than before, not physically but emotionally. Daniel joined them, speaking with a sincerity that felt newly formed. He admitted that he had assumed inheritance would follow tradition, that he had not considered the legal structure his father had chosen. Margaret met his gaze and told him that tradition does not override preparation. She reminded him that Robert had always valued foresight over sentiment. The conversation did not escalate. It did not need to. Understanding had already taken root. That afternoon, Margaret entered Robert's study and opened the window slightly, allowing fresh air to circulate through the room. She sat at his desk and reviewed the trust documents once more. Not out of doubt but out of affirmation. She understood that ownership is not merely about property. It is about agency. It is about the right to remain without negotiation. Downstairs Emily packed away the realtor brochure she had printed only days earlier. Daniel made a phone call to cancel the tentative listing appointment. Their movements were subdued, deliberate. Margaret closed the folder and returned it to the locked drawer. She did not intend to punish. She did not intend to humiliate. She intended to remain. As the sun lowered behind the maple trees in the front yard, the house felt grounded again. Not because conflict had disappeared, but because illusion had. Margaret walked through each room slowly that evening, touching the banister, the dining table, the frame of Robert's portrait. The house did not feel threatened now. It felt acknowledged. And in that quiet acknowledgement, her resolve settled fully into place, steady and unshakable. In the weeks that followed, the Whitmore house settled into a new rhythm, one shaped not by assumption but by quiet acknowledgement. Daniel and Emily remained for a short time. Their presence subdued, their conversations measured. The real estate brochures disappeared from the kitchen counter. The talk of market timing faded into discussions about practical matters, about their own townhouse across town, about rebuilding space that belonged to them. Margaret did not rush them. She did not issue ultimatums. She simply resumed her life within the walls she and Robert had built together. Each morning she watered the hydrangeas lining the walkway, trimming away wilted petals with careful precision. She scheduled the annual furnace inspection, paid the property tax bill from her own account, and renewed the homeowner's insurance without fanfare. Daniel watched these small actions with a new awareness, as though understanding for the first time that stewardship is not inherited by default. One evening he approached Margaret in the living room, where she was folding a quilt Robert's mother had stitched decades earlier. He apologized, not dramatically but sincerely. He admitted that he had allowed convenience to guide his thinking, that he had mistaken expectation for entitlement. Margaret listened and placed the folded quilt neatly over the back of the sofa before responding. She told him that ownership is not about control, but about responsibility. She said that his father had not doubted his love, only his readiness. Daniel nodded, absorbing the weight of those words. Emily stood nearby, quieter than before, her confidence replaced by reflection. She expressed regret for speaking too quickly, for letting plans outpace permission. Margaret accepted the acknowledgement without embellishment. She did not demand further explanation. She did not revisit the remark made at the reception after the funeral. The lesson had already taken root. A month later Daniel and Emily moved back to their own home, carrying boxes down the front steps in steady silence. Margaret stood on the porch as they loaded the last suitcase into the trunk. There was no hostility in the farewell, only a clearer boundary. Daniel embraced his mother longer than usual, promising to visit for dinner the following Sunday. Margaret watched their car turn the corner at the end of the street, the taillights fading into late afternoon light. She remained on the porch for a moment, listening to the soft rustle of leaves across the lawn. Inside, the house felt neither empty nor threatened. It felt anchored. She walked through each room once more, not to inspect but to inhabit. In Robert's study she paused by his desk, resting her hand on the polished wood. She did not need to prove anything further. The trust documents remained locked in their drawer, not as weapons but as safeguards. Margaret moved to the front window and looked out at the quiet street. She had allowed them to believe she was fragile, because sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation ever could. The house had always been hers, not through volume or argument, but through foresight and resolve. And now, with illusion dissolved and dignity intact, she simply closed the curtains against the evening light and carried on, steady and certain, within the home that had never stopped belonging to her.